Hey, I'm Scott,
And I'm Chris.
and this is Doxologic, where we help you think with your Bible.
Next question reads like this. If a man and woman get married, stating vows before God and witnesses, then fail to file their marriage license, are they still considered married in God's eyes? If so, then what would the proper steps of quote-unquote divorce before God look like?
I really don't like the phrase married in God's eyes. I just
Why not?
don't in general because it's usually used to skirt what should be done. So, the idea of cohabitation often goes that way. Well, we're married in God's eyes,
I've committed to her.
I've committed
just
to her. Just to her. That's right. That's right.
before God.
We haven't done it officially,
Yeah.
but I've committed to her.
We knelt down before the bed
Yep.
and we prayed and thanked God for our marriage that we created in our hearts, but before God. And so we're married, or we're even whatever engaged or committed in our hearts. And so you're
Yeah.
right. That's anyways. And
I
not
just
just young people, by the way.
Yeah.
This isn't just
No,
young 21,
No,
22-year-old
you're right.
doing this. All across the spectrum of ages that people talk themselves into that.
Yeah, and so I would be really careful and probably go strongly towards the connection between, if it's true in God's eyes, you did it physically, actually, before the government's eyes as well. Like those go hand in hand. You do both parts, and therefore you have the clarity. You're not cutting corners, right?
Because there is something of a responsibility by God to civil governing authorities.
Right.
They didn't create marriage.
No.
The whole thing about redefining it. They didn't create it, but they should honor it, and it should be recognized who is married to whom. It ought to be a registered thing.
Right.
And so this is the question exists because who knows how many things have been done poorly, either just sinfully or at least foolishly. And so if they're getting divorced, so they say now,
There's another piece
know where to
missing.
start.
There's another piece missing, though. Vows, witnesses, who's the officiant?
Sure.
Who's the officiant? Like, I think we got to be really careful. And again, we've moved so far out of the church with weddings, right? They don't even take place in churches anymore. Every wedding I do, I'm sweating like a dog with my nice shoes on and my suit inside of a barn at 104 degrees. Like, I'd be okay to go back to the air-conditioned church. You know what I'm saying? That's where so many... All right, a little venting going on here.
Okay.
I don't know if our
But-
church is
but I'm-
pretty enough for most people, for the
That's
record.
true. Ours isn't.
You mean the warehouse? No, it's a church.
The black walls?
It's not
I
as
would get
cool.
married here.
There you go. This is where Bree would get married. But I think it's important to understand who married them in the first place. Somebody going online, filling out a form that says I'm an officiant for the day and then marrying
Yeah.
those people, you can get away with that. But
Yeah.
biblically speaking, it's really important to connect your marriage to counsel and good counsel in the church and your pastor being involved. Because what I would say is, it sounds like they're being as flippant with their marriage as they are with their divorce, i.e. married in God's eyes, missing some key physical components like an officiant. And obviously there was one, but I'm not hearing much about that. And I would hope it is a pastor. And therefore, if it is a pastor and you're Christians being faithful, New Testament Christians, you're submitted to the leaders of a local church, then you're not just getting to arbitrarily decide you're going to get divorced.
Well,
we got
even
married in
if
God's
even if you said, even if that was okay, like, oh, I just need to state vows before God, you can't kind of escape the let men not separate what God has joined together.
Yes.
Like, how do you reconcile that?
Right.
Yeah.
And Jesus was, confronted with that and addressed that quite well, took it all the way back to Genesis and didn't change the message. We can go to Matthew 10 for that. Or let's see, I think it's Mark.
Just a comment as well.
Matthew 19, Mark 10.
As you find that, Scott, just in 1 Corinthians 6, by way of application here, or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit? That's not it, sorry. Well, that is important, by the way.
It's also in the Bible, though,
That's
right?
extra. Yeah.
Or do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her? There's this, for it, as it is written, the two shall become one flesh. He was, I'll stop there just to say there's a spiritual component to this that is part of the absolute mess and tragedy of it. Because even if you decide to go your own way. We never legally got married anyways. We called ourselves married. We'll just call ourselves divorced. You have spiritually entangled yourself with another image bearer of God by the sexual joining together presumed to have happened. That is unfortunately going to be more devastating than you probably understand, because you didn't really understand what the marriage thing needed to be set up as, and now you're divorcing maybe in whatever manner you're going to. And just do not lose sight of the fact that spiritually you're in for just, again, devastation.
And I'd be bold enough to say it's a desecration of the character of God, because you bring God in to say you're married in God's eyes. And then you're also going to decide that you can get divorced as well. So it doesn't sound like God's in charge. It sounds like you're in charge, and you're using God's name in vain, in a sense, to have your own authority, but believe God's blessing it because you prayed together and said vows or whatever. And so Jesus addresses this in Mark 10, and I flipped them. It's Matthew 19 and Mark 10. But the Pharisees came up and, in order to test him, asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" There you go. He answered them, "What did Moses command you?" Goes back to the Old Testament. They said, "Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." And Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife." Bam! "The two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh." And this was the verse you quoted, Bree. "What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." You didn't have the authority in the first place. You shouldn't have. And you definitely don't have the authority to just go in there and decide that in God's eyes you were married, and now in God's eyes you're divorced. Two becoming one legitimately is two staying one in marriage. Yep. And are there outs? That's not the question they're asking. It seems like a little bit of a flippant kind of...
Right.
And this person's more looking to counsel these individuals, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would definitely, I would warn them quite sternly.
Yeah. I have a weird question about this question. I feel like I'm forgetting where in the Old Testament, but basically marriage was like symbolized by like a ring in the nose, like the handing over of jewelry. When did it turn to like a pastor officiating, or, you know what I mean? Like an ordained person from the church marrying people?
Yeah, I think it was, I don't know when that took place, you know? I bet it goes back a long, long time.
Yeah.
On the spot, I wouldn't want to like dive into a historical date, but I would want to say that, you know, the church for a long, long time has identified marriage as a part of, in fact, it's in the Roman Catholic Church, it's one of the sacraments, right?
Yeah.
And so it's been around for a long time, the acknowledgement that there's a connection between your marriage and the church's involvement in that sacred union before God. That and this is one of the things that I would feel, and why it's so important, I think, to have, if you're a Christian, to have a pastor marry you, or at least do your biblical counseling and pass off on that, is because we're going to give an account. I'm not marrying someone I'm not confident in the end. And we're going to bear that responsibility. And anyone who's responsible for marrying someone when they didn't feel okay about that is going to be on them in the end. And I tremble at the thought of standing before a living God and giving an account for a marriage that I went through with it when they weren't. And here's the problem. People are so quick to rush into marriage, and then they think they can just get a divorce like they're breaking up. It's not it's not at all the same thing. And then what's crazy about it is they get a divorce and then they'll do it again. They'll rush back together. They'll leave churches over. It's a really, really sad thing. So I think there's a stern warning that's needed. And I would just say you've got to get them involved, talking to their pastor in their local church.
Yeah. Probably wouldn't be like surprising if that was already like another fractured area where they probably weren't a part of a local body and submitting to authority in the church. Yeah.
Right.
Super helpful. Thank you, guys.
You've been listening to Doxologic, a podcast by Doxa Church in Rockland, California. To learn more, visit doxachurch.net.